I stood on my son Brandon's doorstep that Tuesday afternoon, holding a homemade apple pie still warm from the oven. My grandson Tyler had turned 7 last week, and I hadn't been invited to the party. I just wanted to drop off a gift and see his face light up the way it used to. Brandon opened the door, and I could see the irritation flash across his features before he even said a word. I told him I was worried about how distant he'd become lately. That's when his face twisted into something I didn't recognize. He started yelling about me being controlling, suffocating, never knowing when to back off. I reached out to calm him, to touch his shoulder the way I had when he was a boy. And that's when my 38-year-old son slapped me hard across the face. The sound echoed in the entryway. His wife Jessica stood in the hallway behind him, and I swear I saw her smirk. Brandon leaned close and said, "You're old. Know your place." I stood there frozen, my cheek burning. The pie shattered at my feet. I said nothing. I just turned and walked away. The drive back to my place took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. My hands trembled on the steering wheel so badly, I had to pull over twice. I touched my cheek and felt it already swelling, hot under my fingertips. The physical pain was nothing compared to what I felt inside my chest, like something had cracked open and everything good was draining out. I kept seeing flashes of Brandon as a little boy. I remembered him at 5 years old, riding on my shoulders at the county fair, his laughter ringing out as we went on the carousel. I remembered him at 9, crying in my arms the night we buried his mother. Margaret had fought breast cancer for 2 years, and when she finally lost that battle, it was just Brandon and me against the world. I promised her I'd take care of our boy. I promised I'd give him everything. And I had. God help me. I had given him everything. After Margaret died, I worked double shifts as a contractor. I took every job I could find, building decks, renovating kitchens, framing houses in the Portland suburbs. I'd come home exhausted, my back aching, my hands covered in cuts and calluses, but I made sure Brandon had everything he needed. I put him through college. I paid for his apartment. I never remarried, never even dated seriously, because every bit of energy I had went into making sure my son could build a better life than I'd had. And he did build that life. Brandon became a successful software sales manager, making 6 figures by the time he was 30. He met Jessica at some corporate event. She came from money, old Portland family wealth, the kind of people who summered at Cannon Beach and belonged to country clubs I couldn't afford to park near. I knew from the start that Jessica's family looked down on me. To them, I was just a contractor, working class, hands dirty from actual labor. But I didn't care about their judgment. I cared about Brandon's happiness. So when he told me 5 years ago that he and Jessica wanted to build their dream home, I made him an offer that changed everything. I owned 2 acres of beautiful land in a desirable neighborhood just outside Portland. That land had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather bought it in 1947, when it was just empty field. My father built a small cabin on it, where I spent summers as a boy. When my parents passed, the land came to me. It was the most valuable thing I owned, worth more than everything else I had combined. I told Brandon he could build his house on that land. We made a verbal agreement, the kind fathers and sons used to make when handshakes still meant something. He'd build his dream home, and eventually, when his career was solid and he had the savings, he'd buy the land from me at a fair price. Or maybe I'd just pass it to him in my will. We never put it in writing. He was my son. I trusted him. Brandon built an $850,000 custom home on my land. It was stunning, everything he and Jessica had dreamed of. 3,000 square feet, 4 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen, a master suite with a bathroom bigger than my living room. They moved in 4 years ago. Tyler was born a year later. I thought we'd grow closer, that I'd be part of their lives, an involved grandfather. But something changed about 3 years ago. Jessica started making comments about me being too involved, dropping by too often, offering unwanted advice. Brandon started pulling away. Our weekly dinners became monthly, then quarterly, then nothing. Phone calls went unreturned. I was excluded from holidays. Last Thanksgiving, I ate a frozen turkey dinner alone in my rental house, while my son and grandson celebrated a mile away without me. I was allowed to see Tyler only occasionally, and always on their terms, always supervised, always with Jessica watching me like I might contaminate her child with my working-class values. Today's visit wasn't planned. I just missed my grandson's birthday so much it physically hurt. I baked his favorite pie and wrapped the toy truck I'd carved from wood in my little workshop. I drove over unannounced, knowing I probably shouldn't, but unable to stop myself. And Brandon had hit me for it. When I finally got home to my small rental house, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at nothing. The house felt empty and cold. I downsized to this place after letting Brandon build on my land, thinking I'd be spending most of my time with my family anyway. Why did I need a big house when I had Brandon's place to visit? Eventually, I stood up and walked to the filing cabinet in my spare bedroom. I pulled out the folder I hadn't looked at in years. Inside were all the documents related to the land. The deed was still in my name, Augustine Robert Whitmore. Brandon had never bought the land. I had never transferred it. Legally, that $850,000 house sat on property I owned. Brandon was living in a mansion built on my land, treating me like garbage, and I was struggling to pay rent on a 2-bedroom house with old carpet and a leaky faucet. The realization hit me like cold water. I'd given my son the most valuable asset I had, and he'd just struck me across the face while his wife smirked in the background. I was still sitting there, touching my swollen cheek, when my phone rang. It was Dorothy, my neighbor from when I lived in the old house. She'd seen me leave Brandon's place, had noticed my face was red and my eyes were wet. "Augustine, honey, what happened?" she asked. And I broke. I told her everything. The slap, the exclusion, the years of being pushed away, the land I'd given that was never appreciated. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that changed everything. "Augustine, that land is worth over $400,000 now. You're living in a tiny rental house, while your son built a mansion on your property and treats you like garbage. Wake up." After we hung up, I sat in the dark for hours. Something was shifting inside me, something that had been dormant for too long. It wasn't just anger, it was clarity. For the first time in years, I could see the situation clearly, without the fog of guilt and desperate love clouding my judgment. I touched my face again. The bruise was forming, dark purple spreading across my cheekbone. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I woke up Wednesday with the bruise fully formed, a dark purple and yellow mess that covered half my face. I stood in the bathroom, looking at myself in the mirror. I saw an old man who'd given everything and received violence in return. I was 67 years old. I'd spent the last 30 years sacrificing, providing, enabling. And what did I have to show for it? A bruised face and a grandson I wasn't allowed to see. Something had hardened in my chest overnight, like metal cooling into a new shape. I made 3 phone calls before 9 in the morning. The first was to Harold Brennan, an old friend who'd become a real estate attorney. We'd worked together years ago when I was building an addition on his house. He'd always told me if I ever needed legal help, I should call. The second call was to Diane Martinez, a real estate agent whose kitchen I'd renovated back in 2010. She'd given me her card and said she owed me a favor. The third call was to my doctor's office. I made an emergency appointment and asked them to photograph and document my injury as evidence of assault. Harold met me at his office downtown at 11. I brought all the documents related to the land. He spread them across his conference table, reading through everything with the careful attention lawyers bring to important matters. After 20 minutes, he looked up at me with serious eyes. "Augustine, legally speaking, this situation is crystal clear," he said. "You own the land. Brandon owns the house structure, but it sits on your property. There's no written lease, no rental agreement, no purchase contract, nothing. He's been living there based solely on a verbal family agreement." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I already knew. "It means you have every legal right to sell this land. Brandon would have to negotiate with the new owner to buy the land, move the house somehow, or vacate. But legally, you don't owe him anything. He's essentially been squatting on your property with your permission, which you can revoke at any time." I felt my throat tighten. "He's my son. His child lives there." Harold leaned forward. "Augustine, he hit you. Would you let a stranger who hit you, live, rent-free, on your most valuable asset?" The question sat heavy in the air between us. Harold took photographs of my face from multiple angles. He had me write a detailed account of what happened, then had it notarized. "This was insurance," he explained, "in case Brandon tried to cause legal trouble later. We had documentation that this wasn't arbitrary cruelty. This was a father protecting himself after being assaulted." My next stop was Diane's office. She took one look at my face, and her expression shifted from professional friendliness to concern, but she didn't ask questions. I showed her the land documents. She pulled up comparables on her computer, checking recent sales in that neighborhood. "Augustine, I need to be honest with you," she said after 10 minutes of research. "This land is worth at least $425,000 in the current market, maybe more. Properties in that area are extremely desirable. Low inventory, high demand. I could sell this in less than a week. $425,000. The number felt unreal. That was more than I'd made in the last 10 years combined. How fast could we move? I asked. If you're serious? I have 3 clients actively looking for land in that exact area. I could have offers by tomorrow. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking slightly. Diane, I need you to understand something. My son built a house on this land. If I sell it, his life is going to fall apart. She nodded slowly. I understand. Are you sure you want to do this? I thought about Tyler, my grandson. I thought about how Jessica and Brandon had already cut me out of his life, how I was allowed only supervised monthly visits if I behaved. I thought about how they'd taken my generosity and turned it into entitlement, how they'd taken my love and returned it with contempt. I'm not doing this just for revenge, I said. I'm 67. I'm living in a rental house, struggling with medical bills, worried about my retirement. Meanwhile, my son lives in luxury on my sacrifice and tells me to know my place. This isn't about punishment, it's about survival. Diane reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. Then let's get you that survival. I spent the afternoon at Harold's office while he prepared the preliminary documents. We were interrupted around 3 in the afternoon when my phone buzzed. It was a text message from Brandon. I read it twice, unable to believe the words. Don't come to our house again. You're not welcome. We'll arrange supervised visits with Tyler once a month if you behave. Jessica thinks you're a bad influence. No apology. No acknowledgement of what he'd done. Just cold, casual cruelty, reducing me to a supervised visitor in my own grandson's life, as if I were some kind of threat that needed to be managed. I showed the text to Harold. He read it and shook his head. That's your answer right there, Augustine. That's who your son has become. I looked at the text one more time, then made my decision. Sell it, I told Diane when I called her. Sell it as fast as you can. I want this done before they know what's happening. Are you absolutely certain? She asked. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. That night I barely slept. Part of me still loved my son, still remembered the boy who'd needed me so desperately after his mother died. But another part of me, the part that had been dormant for too long, knew that love without boundaries isn't really love at all. It's just fear dressed up as sacrifice. By Thursday morning, Diane called with news. She had a serious buyer already. Diane's voice was excited when she called Thursday morning. Augustine, I have a couple who are very interested, Peter and Amanda Walsh. They're in their early 30s, pre-approved for financing, and they've been searching for land in that neighborhood for 8 months. They're prepared to move quickly. How quickly? I asked. They want to see it today. If they like it, they'll make an offer immediately. My heart was pounding. The house. Brandon's house. They understand it's there? I explained the situation in general terms. They understand there's an existing structure on the property and that there are complications with the current occupant. They're willing to navigate that. Peter and Amanda Walsh came to view the land that afternoon. I met them there, standing on the property that had been in my family for 3 generations. They were young, earnest, clearly in love with each other, and with the idea of building their dream home. They reminded me of what Brandon and Jessica could have been if pride and entitlement hadn't poisoned everything. Brandon's house loomed behind us. Impressive and expensive. Amanda looked at it with appreciation. That's beautiful craftsmanship, she said. My son built it, I replied. It's been a complicated situation. Peter was direct. Our attorney explained that you own the land, but not the structure. We understand there might be legal complexities. We're prepared for that if the price is right. They made an offer that evening, $430,000. I accepted. Harold expedited everything. Because I held clear title with no encumbrances, liens, or complications, the sale could close quickly. In Oregon, with motivated parties and cash buyers, it was possible to close in as little as a week. We scheduled closing for the following Wednesday, 6 days from the moment Brandon had slapped me. During those 6 days, I felt like I was living in a dream. Part of me kept waiting to wake up, to realize I couldn't actually go through with it. But every time I looked in the mirror and saw the fading bruise, every time I remembered Brandon's words or Jessica's smirk, my resolve hardened. Harold prepared the legal notice that would be delivered to Brandon and Jessica. It was formal and clear. Notice of property sale. The property located at address has been sold to Peter and Amanda Walsh. Closing date. Date. The new owners will take legal possession 30 days from this notice. The structure located on said property remains the property of Brandon Whitmore. All future negotiations regarding the structure must be conducted with the new property owners. The previous landowner, Augustine Whitmore, is no longer involved in any matters related to this property. We had the notice delivered 2 ways: certified mail and physical posting on their front door, both legal requirements for proper notification. Tuesday evening, Harold arranged to have the notice posted at 6 in the morning Wednesday. He hired a process server to handle it professionally. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Brandon and Jessica waking up, seeing that notice, reading those words. Part of me felt sick. Part of me felt something I hadn't felt in years. Powerful. Wednesday morning came. The sale closed at 10 in the morning. I signed the papers in Harold's office. Peter and Amanda signed theirs. The money transferred. Just like that, the land my grandfather had bought in 1947, the land my father had cherished, the land I'd given my son to build his dreams on, belonged to strangers. I walked out of that office with a check for $430,000 and a weight off my shoulders I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. My phone started ringing at 10:30. Brandon. 15 missed calls in 10 minutes. I didn't answer. The voicemail started piling up, and I could hear his voice escalating with each one. Dad, what the hell is this notice? Call me back. This is some kind of mistake. You can't sell the land. Call me immediately. What did you do? This is illegal. Our house is here. You can't just sell the property under our house. You senile old man. I'm calling my lawyer. You're going to regret this. Jessica left messages too, her voice sharp and furious. How dare you do this to your own family? We're calling the police. This is elder abuse or fraud or something. You're going to pay for this. I listened to each message once, then deleted them. Harold had advised me not to engage directly. Let them contact him. Let everything go through proper legal channels. Around 2 in the afternoon, I heard pounding on my front door. I looked through the peephole and saw Brandon, his face red, his eyes wild. Harold was already there. I'd asked him to come over, anticipating this confrontation. I opened the door with the chain lock on. You can't do this, Brandon shouted. That's my house. My son lives there. You're destroying your grandson's home. The land was mine, I said quietly. I sold it. Your house is your problem. You should have thought about that before you hit me. I barely touched you. You're being dramatic. This is insane. Harold stepped into view behind me. Brandon, your father had every legal right to sell his property. You have no legal claim to that land. You never purchased it. You never had a written lease. You'll need to work with the new owners. This conversation is over. This is because of one argument? Brandon's voice cracked. You're going to destroy my entire life over one fight? You didn't fight me, Brandon, I said. You hit me. There's a difference. That's when Jessica appeared behind him. She looked different than I'd ever seen her. Her usual composure cracked, her makeup smudged. But when she spoke, her words were pure venom. You did this out of spite because you know you're a failure who never gave us anything of real value, she hissed. That land was the only useful thing about you. And now you've thrown away your only chance to ever see Tyler again. We were going to let you be in his life. Now you'll never see your grandson. Ever. Her words were meant to wound, to make me regret, to make me back down. But instead, they did something else. They liberated me. Because in that moment, I realized that access to Tyler was always going to be conditional, controlled, weaponized. I was never going to have a real relationship with my grandson under their rules. They'd already taken him from me. This changed nothing except my bank account. Leave my property, I said. Don't come back. Brandon stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. Maybe I'd been a stranger to myself for years, and I was finally meeting who I really was, underneath all that desperate love and guilty sacrifice. Harold closed the door. Through the window, I watched my son and his wife walk back to their car. Brandon's shoulders were shaking. I thought he might be crying. I felt no triumph, just a deep, sad certainty that I'd done what I had to do. The next 2 weeks were chaos I could only watch from a distance. Harold kept me informed. Brandon and Jessica contacted 4 different attorneys. Each one told them the same thing. Augustine had clear legal right to sell his property. There was no case for fraud, no claim of elder abuse, no grounds for legal action. Their only options were to negotiate with Peter and Amanda Walsh, to purchase the land, find some way to physically move the house, or prepare to vacate. Moving the house was financially impossible. The structure wasn't designed to be relocated, and the cost would exceed $500,000 even if it were feasible. That left negotiation. Harold facilitated a meeting between Brandon and the Walshes at a neutral location. Peter and Amanda were genuinely sympathetic to Brandon's situation. They hadn't bought the land to hurt anyone. They were just a young couple trying to build their future. They made Brandon an offer. They'd sell him the land at their cost, $430,000, giving him first right of refusal before they moved forward with their own plans. It was more than fair. It was generous. But Brandon couldn't secure the financing. His income was good, around $120,000 a year, but most of his and Jessica's money was tied up in the house structure itself. They'd taken out a construction loan to build it, then refinanced into a traditional mortgage on the structure. The bank held a lien on the house but not the land, because Brandon didn't own the land. Now Brandon needed to secure another $430,000 loan on top of his existing mortgage. The banks wouldn't do it. The numbers didn't work. His debt-to-income ratio was too high. Jessica's parents had money. Serious money. But when Jessica called them for help, her father refused. I learned this later from Catherine, Jessica's mother. But in those early weeks, I just knew the help wasn't coming. Peter and Amanda were patient, but they had their own timeline. They'd purchased the land to build their dream home. They gave Brandon 45 days to arrange financing or make other arrangements. If he couldn't, they'd require him to remove the house, or they'd seek legal remedy to clear the property. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was watching everything unfold. I didn't live there anymore, but Dorothy still did, and she kept me informed. The story spread quickly. Augustine Whitmore sold the land his son's house sat on after the son assaulted him. The community divided. Some neighbors were horrified. How could a father do this to his son? What about the child? It was cruel, vindictive, unforgivable. But others knew the full story. Dorothy made sure of that. She told anyone who'd listen about the slap, about years of Brandon and Jessica excluding me, about how I'd given everything and received contempt in return. Mrs. Patterson, who lived 3 houses down from Brandon, brought me a casserole. "You did the right thing," she said. "I've watched that boy treat you poorly for years." Someone needed to teach him consequences. Mr. Chen, whose deck I'd built 15 years ago, invited me to dinner. "Family doesn't give you the right to be abusive," he said. "You protected yourself. That takes courage." But I also received hate mail. Someone left a note on my car. "Child abuser. You're taking a little boy's home." Another message slipped under my door. "You'll rot in hell for what you've done to your own blood." Each cruel word hurt, but not as much as Brandon's slap had hurt. Not as much as years of exclusion had hurt. The worst part was hearing about Tyler. Jessica, in her desperation and anger, was using their 7-year-old son as a weapon. Dorothy's daughter, Rachel, taught 2nd grade at Tyler's school. She called Dorothy one evening, troubled by something she'd witnessed. Tyler had been telling other children that his grandpa was a bad man who was making them lose their house. The little boy was repeating things he'd clearly been told at home. "Grandpa doesn't love us. Grandpa is mean. Grandpa wants us to be homeless." When Dorothy told me this, I had to sit down. My hands were shaking. They were poisoning my grandson against me, teaching a 7-year-old to hate his grandfather, using him as a pawn in their adult drama. That night, I cried for the first time since Margaret's funeral. Not for Brandon, not for the house, for Tyler, who was learning all the wrong lessons about love and family and consequences. I was still raw from that news when I got an unexpected knock on my door 3 weeks after the sale. I opened it to find Catherine, Jessica's mother. I'd met her maybe 5 times in all the years Brandon and Jessica had been together. She was elegant, composed, wearing clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I expected threats. Maybe she'd come to tell me her lawyers were going to find some way to undo the sale. Maybe she'd come to berate me for hurting her daughter. Instead, she asked if she could come in. I made coffee. We sat at my small kitchen table, and Catherine looked around my modest rental house with something in her eyes I couldn't quite read. "I need to apologize to you," she finally said. He blinked. "Certain," I'd misheard. "I raised Jessica to value money and status above character," Catherine continued. "I looked down on you because you were a contractor, working class. I encouraged her to view you as beneath us. I see now what that created. My daughter has become cruel. My son-in-law struck his own father. I'm ashamed." I didn't know what to say. "I came to tell you that I understand why you did this," she said. "And I don't blame you. I also came to tell you that I offered to help Brandon buy the land. I offered to loan them the money, $430,000, interest-free." "What did he say?" I asked. "He refused." Catherine's voice was bitter. "Do you know why?" I shook my head. "Pride," she said. "He won't take help from me because it would mean admitting he failed. He won't take help from you because he hates that he ever needed you. My daughter married a man who would rather lose everything than admit he was wrong. I thought you should know that this didn't have to happen. Brandon chose this. After Catherine left, I sat in the growing darkness of my kitchen, processing her words. Brandon had been offered a lifeline and refused it. This wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't even about the land. It was about a man who'd rather destroy his own life than accept that he'd made mistakes. That realization should have made me feel better. Instead, it just made me sad. The 45 days passed like water flowing downhill, inevitable and swift. Brandon couldn't secure financing. He couldn't swallow his pride enough to accept help from Catherine. He couldn't negotiate any alternative arrangement. Peter and Amanda Walsh were patient, but they had their own dreams to pursue. The deadline arrived on a Tuesday morning in late autumn. Brandon and Jessica had to vacate. I heard about the moving process from Dorothy. It was chaos. Brandon and Jessica scrambled to find a rental house in a market where inventory was tight and prices were high. They ended up in a cramped 3-bedroom rental in a less desirable neighborhood, paying $2,800 a month for a place that was a fraction of the size of their custom home. Their furniture didn't fit. The hand-carved dining table that had seated 12 in their old house couldn't even go through the door of the new place. They had to put half their belongings in storage, paying another $200 monthly for a unit to hold the remnants of their former life. Tyler had to change schools mid-year, pulled from the prestigious private academy where he'd been thriving and enrolled in the overcrowded public school in their new district. Brandon legally owned the house structure, but he couldn't afford to move it. Peter and Amanda made him an offer. They'd buy the house from him for $400,000, significantly below its actual value, but Brandon had no leverage to negotiate. He could accept their offer, or watch them pursue legal action to remove the structure from their property. He accepted. Brandon lost over $450,000 in effective value. His dream home, the place he'd imagined raising his son, became someone else's property. Peter and Amanda planned to renovate it to their own taste, erasing every trace of Brandon's vision. I didn't witness any of this directly. I stayed away, living my own life, trying not to think too much about the destruction I'd caused. But in a town like ours, word spreads. People talk. They told me Brandon started drinking. Just a beer or two at night at first, then more. His work performance suffered. He missed meetings. He showed up late, distracted, his clothes wrinkled, and his eyes hollow. Jessica blamed him constantly. Their fights could be heard through the thin walls of their rental house. The neighbors complained. The marriage was fracturing under the pressure, every old resentment magnified by their new circumstances. Meanwhile, my life changed dramatically. With $430,000, I paid off every debt I had. I put $100,000 in savings for emergencies and my uncertain future. And I bought a house. Not a mansion, not something to impress anyone. Just a modest 2-bedroom cottage in a quiet neighborhood with a big backyard and a garage I could convert into a workshop. For the first time in 5 years, I owned my own home. For the first time in decades, I had financial security. I didn't have to worry about rent increases or emergency medical bills bankrupting me. I could breathe. I started volunteering at the community center, teaching woodworking classes to teenagers. I made new friends. I saw a grief counselor to help me process the loss of my relationship with Brandon, to work through the guilt that still gnawed at me in quiet moments. I was learning to forgive myself. 3 months after the sale, Harold called me with news. "Augustine, you need to hear this," he said. "Brandon tried to file a lawsuit against you." My stomach dropped. What kind of lawsuit? Everything his lawyer could think of. Emotional distress, alienation, elder abuse claims. It was a desperate Hail Mary attempt. What happened? It was thrown out. The judge took one look at the documentation, the photographs of your injuries, the clear property records, and dismissed it with prejudice. But in the process, something came to light. Harold explained that, during the legal proceedings, financial records had been subpoenaed. That's when he discovered something neither of us had known. 2 years ago, Brandon and Jessica had remortgaged the house structure and taken out $200,000 in equity. Harold obtained copies of the financial records showing where that money went. A boat. $55,000 for a cabin cruiser they used maybe 3 times. 2 luxury cars. An $80,000 SUV for Jessica. A $60,000 sports car for Brandon. Designer furniture. $20,000 at high-end stores. A trip to Europe. 3 weeks in Italy and France. First-class flights, 5-star hotels. $30,000. They'd been living far beyond their means, financing a lifestyle they couldn't afford on debt, secured against a house they'd built on land they didn't own. They'd treated my generosity as their own asset to leverage for luxuries. "There's more," Harold said. "I spoke to a colleague who knows Jessica's family. Apparently, 2 years ago, Catherine offered to lend Brandon money to buy the land from you properly. Jessica convinced Brandon to refuse because she wanted him to inherit it for free. She didn't want to waste money buying what she thought Brandon deserved by right." I sat down heavily. The full picture was finally clear. Brandon and Jessica had never intended to buy the land. They'd considered it already theirs, an inheritance they were entitled to. They'd built not just a house but an entire fantasy life on top of my sacrifice, never considering that it might not be permanent. "Augustine, there's one more thing," Harold said, his voice gentle. "Brandon's employer fired him last week." "What? The drinking? The performance issues? The distraction?" "They let him go, and Jessica just filed for divorce. She's taking Tyler and moving back in with her parents." I hung up the phone and sat in my new living room, surrounded by the modest furniture I'd bought, looking out at the backyard where I'd started planting a garden. Brandon was losing everything, not because of what I'd done, but because of how he'd built his entire life on arrogance and assumption. I'd just removed the artificial foundation that was hiding the rot. If I'd never sold the land, this collapse would have happened eventually. The debt would have grown. The entitlement would have deepened. The reckoning would have come, just later and probably worse. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sad and vindicated and guilty, and relieved all at once. Emotions are complicated when it comes to watching your child destroy themselves. But I also felt something else: clarity. I'd done the right thing. Not the easy thing, not the comfortable thing, but the right thing. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their actions. 6 months after I sold the land, I'd settled into a rhythm. I woke early, made coffee in my sunny kitchen, spent mornings in my workshop building small furniture pieces I donated to charity. Afternoons I volunteered at the community center, teaching awkward teenagers how to measure twice and cut once, how to sand with the grain, how to take pride in creating something with their own hands. I made friends. Real friends, not people who tolerated me out of obligation. Dorothy visited every Thursday for dinner. Harold and his wife had me over for Sunday barbecues. The community center director, a kind woman named Susan, invited me to join the board. I was learning what it felt like to be valued for myself, not for what I could provide. I thought about Brandon and Tyler every day. The grief counselor told me that was normal, that I was mourning not just the relationship I'd lost but the relationship I'd never actually had, the fantasy of the grateful son and the involved grandfather. I'd accepted I might never see Tyler again. That acceptance hurt, but it also freed me from the desperate hoping that had defined so much of my life. So when Catherine appeared at my door one Saturday morning in early spring, Tyler's small hand clasped in hers, I thought I was dreaming. "Hello, Augustine," Catherine said. "I hope this is okay. Tyler has been asking about you constantly." I looked down at my grandson. He'd grown taller in 6 months. He looked uncertain, shy, his eyes darting between Catherine and me. "Hi, Tyler," I said, my voice rough with sudden emotion. "Hi, Grandpa," he whispered. Catherine explained the situation. Jessica had moved back in with her parents. The divorce was proceeding. Brandon had supervised visitation only because of the drinking, which he was finally addressing in rehab. Catherine had temporary custody, while Jessica dealt with her own issues. "Tyler deserves to know his grandfather," Catherine said firmly. "Jessica doesn't have to like it. But I have legal custody right now, and I'm making this happen." I invited them in. Catherine left us alone, saying she'd be back in a few hours. Tyler and I stood in my living room, this little boy I loved so much but barely knew, and I didn't know what to say. "Mom said you were mean to us," Tyler finally said. "That you made us lose our house." I knelt down to his level, my old knees protesting. "Tyler, I'm not going to lie to you. I did something that hurt your mom and dad. But I did it because your dad hurt me first, and I had to protect myself. Grown-up problems are complicated. But I want you to know that I love you, and I never wanted you to be caught in the middle. None of this was your fault. Dad says you're the reason he's sad all the time. Your dad is sad because of choices he made. I'm sad too. We're both sad. But that doesn't mean we can't still love each other, even when we're hurt." Tyler thought about this. "Can we build something?" he asked. "Like we used to?" We spent the afternoon in my workshop. I helped Tyler build a small birdhouse, his hands clumsy but eager under my guidance. We measured the wood together. I showed him how to use the hammer safely, how to drive a nail straight. When he smashed his thumb lightly, I showed him my own scarred fingers and told him every carpenter has injuries. It's part of learning. We made sandwiches for lunch. We watched an old Western movie on my couch. Tyler fell asleep against my shoulder, and I held him there, this precious weight, and felt something in my chest unknot. When Catherine returned, she found us in the backyard. Tyler was showing her the birdhouse with pride. "Grandpa and I made it. We're going to put it in his tree and watch for birds." Catherine looked at me, and I saw tears in her eyes. "Can he come back?" she asked. "I hope so," I said. "But that's up to the grown-ups. All I can promise is that I'll always love him, and whenever he needs me, I'll be here." Catherine became an unexpected ally. She worked within the family court system, arguing that Tyler needed stability and that I was part of that stability. Jessica was too overwhelmed with her divorce and her own issues to fight effectively. 2 months later, I was granted formal grandparent visitation rights. Every other Saturday, Tyler came to my house. We built things. We cooked together. We talked about his feelings, his confusion about his parents' separation, his worries about school. I didn't badmouth Brandon or Jessica. I answered Tyler's questions honestly but gently. I tried to help him understand that adults make mistakes, that families can be complicated, that love doesn't mean everything is perfect. Through the grapevine, I heard Brandon was doing better. He'd completed rehab. He was sober. He'd found a new job, lower level than before, but honest work. He was living in a small apartment, attending AA meetings, going to therapy. He hadn't apologized to me, but he'd stopped blaming me publicly. That was something. 4 months into my regular visits with Tyler, I ran into Brandon at the grocery store. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the produce section, picking through tomatoes, when I looked up and saw him staring at me from the end of the aisle. He looked terrible. Thinner. Older. The cocky confidence that used to define him had been replaced by something tentative and broken. I considered walking away. It would have been easier. But I'd learned over the past year that easy and right aren't always the same thing. Brandon approached slowly. We stood there among the vegetables, 2 men who used to know each other trying to figure out what we were now. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Brandon said quietly. "I don't forgive myself. I hit you, my own father. I don't know who I was." "You were someone who forgot where you came from," I replied. "I lost everything. Jessica, the house, my job, my dignity. You were right to do what you did. I would have destroyed all of it anyway." I didn't disagree. Brandon's voice cracked. "Mom made Catherine promise to watch over you. Did you know that? Before she died, Mom was terrified I wouldn't take care of you. She made Catherine promise. And Catherine kept that promise by making sure you got justice, even if it meant my marriage falling apart." I hadn't known. The revelation hit me hard. "I failed, Mom," Brandon continued. "I failed you. I failed everyone. Brandon, your mother loved you more than anything. She'd be heartbroken to see what happened, but she'd also want you to get back up. You can't change what you did. But you can change what you do next." "I don't know if I can." "You can," I said, "because you're my son. And I didn't raise a kidder." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a business card for the community center where I volunteered. "We need a bookkeeper. Part-time. It doesn't pay much, but it's honest work. If you want it, tell them I sent you." Brandon took the card with shaking hands. "Why would you help me?" "Because despite everything, you're still my son. And I remember who you were before life got complicated. That person is still in there. We didn't hug. We didn't make grand promises. But something passed between us, fragile as spider silk but real. A possibility. A crack in the wall." Brandon took the job. He showed up on time, did the work quietly, didn't ask for special treatment. Every Wednesday evening, when I was teaching my woodworking class, I'd see him in the office going through receipts and invoices. We'd nod to each other, sometimes exchange a few words. "How's Tyler?" "He's good. Growing like a weed." "That's good." It wasn't reconciliation, but it was something. A beginning of something that might someday become reconciliation if we both kept working at it. Some wounds heal fast. Others take years. Some never fully heal. They just become scars you learn to live with. I was learning to live with mine. 1 year after the slap that changed everything, I sat on the back porch of my little house, watching the sun set over my garden. Tyler was in the yard, throwing a tennis ball for Buddy, the golden retriever I'd adopted 3 months ago. The dog's name was ironic, I suppose, but it fit. Catherine's car was in my driveway. She'd started joining us for these Saturday visits, and somehow we'd become genuine friends. She was learning to knit, sitting in my spare rocking chair with yarn tangled around her fingers, cursing softly when she dropped a stitch. Brandon's progress had been slow but steady. He'd been sober for 8 months now. We saw each other once a week at the community center, Our conversations brief but no longer painful. We were rebuilding, one careful brick at a time. Trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy, but it can be rebuilt if both people are willing to do the work. Jessica had remarried, quickly, to a man her parents approved of. She had minimal custody of Tyler, seemingly more interested in her new life than in being a mother. Tyler lived primarily with Catherine now, with regular visits to me and supervised visits to Brandon. The boy was thriving. He had a therapist who helped him process the chaos of the past year. He knew his parents loved him even if they were flawed. He knew his grandfather had fought for dignity, not against him. I'd taught him that love doesn't mean accepting mistreatment, that boundaries are how we protect the people we care about, including ourselves. Tyler ran up to the porch, Buddy bounding beside him, both of them panting and happy. "Grandpa, look! I taught Buddy to catch!" He demonstrated, tossing the ball high. Buddy leaped, jaws snapping, and caught it midair. "That's excellent work," I said, and Tyler beamed. These moments, these simple, uncomplicated moments of connection, were worth everything I'd lost. Later, after Catherine had taken Tyler home, after the dishes were washed and the house was quiet, I sat alone with my thoughts. I thought about that day a year ago, standing on Brandon's doorstep with a pie and hope, leaving with a bruised face and shattered illusions. I thought about the choice I'd made, the land I'd sold, the consequences that rippled out from that decision. Some people still judged me harshly. Some always would. But I'd learned that living for other people's approval is a prison you build yourself. I'd lived 68 years, and I'd learned some hard truths along the way. Love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just fear dressed up as sacrifice. I gave my son everything, thinking that's what good fathers do. But I never taught him the cost of things. I never taught him that gifts require gratitude, that sacrifice demands respect. When Brandon hit me, he didn't just strike my face. He struck at the core of who I am. And in that moment, I had to choose. Do I absorb this like I'd absorbed everything else, shrinking smaller and smaller until I disappear? Or do I stand up and say no more? Selling that land wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. It was about looking in the mirror and recognizing that I matter too, that my dignity has value, that you can love someone and still protect yourself from them. People say blood is thicker than water, but the full saying is different. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The bonds we choose, the relationships we build on mutual respect, those matter more than biology alone. Brandon is my son. I will always love him. But love doesn't mean accepting abuse. It doesn't mean sacrificing yourself on the altar of family obligation until there's nothing left of you. The hardest part wasn't selling the land. It was accepting that I'd enabled Brandon's worst qualities by never setting boundaries. I taught him that he could take and face no consequences. I taught him that my love was unconditional, to the point of self-destruction. That was my failure as a father. But it's never too late to teach a different lesson. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their actions, not to punish them, but to give them the chance to grow. Brandon lost his house, his job, his marriage, but he gained something more valuable: humility, self-awareness, the understanding that the world doesn't owe him anything. Those lessons are worth more than any mansion. And Tyler learned something I wish I'd learned earlier, that it's okay to love people from a distance sometimes, that you can honor your family without letting them destroy you, that standing up for yourself doesn't make you selfish, it makes you whole. A few weeks ago, Brandon came by my house. I'd invited him for dinner, something we'd been building toward for months. Catherine brought Tyler, then stayed because the four of us had become an unlikely unit. The conversation was careful but genuine. Brandon washed dishes without being asked. He asked about my woodworking projects with real interest. He played gently with Tyler, being the father the boy needed. Before he left, Brandon stood at my door and said something I'd been waiting a year to hear. "Dad, I'll never be able to repay you for the land, for everything. But I want you to know that losing it all saved my life. I was drowning and didn't know it. You threw me a lifeline by cutting me loose. I understand that now." I put my hand on his shoulder. "You don't owe me repayment. You owe yourself honesty. You owe Tyler a father who shows up. You owe the world the best version of yourself. That's all I ever wanted for you." After everyone left, I sat with Buddy and looked at a photograph of Margaret. "I hope I did right by our boy," I whispered to her memory. "I hope you understand." I think she would have. Margaret was fierce about protecting the people she loved. She would have understood that sometimes protection means letting go. Here's what I want you to take from my story. Your worth isn't determined by what you give away. It's determined by what you keep for yourself. Self-respect, dignity, boundaries. Being a good parent doesn't mean being a doormat. Being a good person doesn't mean accepting mistreatment in the name of peace. Sometimes, peace is the wrong goal. Sometimes what's needed is justice, clarity, and consequences. I could have kept quiet. I could have let Brandon live on that land forever, accepting scraps of his attention, swallowing my pain, pretending the slap never happened. Many people would call that forgiveness. I call it cowardice. Real forgiveness comes after accountability. Real healing comes after truth. Real love exists only where there's mutual respect. I'm an old man now. I don't have many years left, but I'll spend them with my head high, with my grandson in my life, with friends who value me, with a son who's learning to be better. I'll spend them in a home I own, on land I chose, with dignity intact. That slap hurt. The betrayal hurt more. But what would have hurt most is if I'd done nothing. If I'd taught my grandson that love means accepting abuse. If I'd taught my son that actions have no consequences. Instead, I taught them both that love is powerful, but so is justice. That family is important, but so is self-respect. That forgiveness is beautiful, but it has to be earned. I sold the land my son's house stood on. Some people will never understand that. But I didn't do it for them. I did it for me. And in doing so, I gave my son the greatest gift I could. The opportunity to hit bottom and build himself back up, the right way this time. That's not cruelty. That's love. The hard kind. The kind that costs something. The kind that matters. As I sit here now, watching the stars come out over my garden, listening to Buddy snore at my feet, I feel something I haven't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness. Exactly. Peace is deeper than happiness. It's the calm that comes from knowing you acted with integrity, that you protected what mattered, that you chose yourself when choosing yourself was the hardest thing you could do. If you're in a situation where someone you love is treating you poorly, where your generosity is being exploited, where your boundaries are being violated, I want you to know, it's okay to protect yourself. It's okay to say no more. It's okay to choose your own dignity over someone else's comfort. Family is important, but you're important too. Love matters, but so do you. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for the person hurting you, is to let them face the consequences of their choices. That's my story. That's my lesson. That's what I learned at 67 years old when my son slapped me, and I decided I mattered enough to fight back. I hope it helps someone out there who needs to hear it. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between family loyalty and self-respect? Have you ever had to set boundaries with someone you love, knowing it might damage the relationship? How did you handle it? What would you have done in my situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who's struggling with the same choice. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel something, please hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories about real life, real struggles, and real lessons. And share this with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to choose themselves, that protecting your dignity isn't selfish, it's necessary. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. I hope you find the courage to stand up for yourself when you need to, and the wisdom to know when that time has come. Take care of yourselves out there. You matter more than you think.